Hello and welcome. I'm Jono Hayes and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios, and these are our top stories. JD Vance meets Netanyahu in Jerusalem, warning the US and its allies have a tough task ahead of them in Gaza. Moscow strikes Kiev after Ukraine used British-made missiles on Russia as Trump calls off talks with Putin. And seeing double, Eurostar announces plans to roll out double-decker trains through the Channel Tunnel. Now to our first story this evening. JD Vance has met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel today, as he says the Gaza deal is going better than expected. The US Vice President and his wife Usha Vance were welcomed by Netanyahu and his wife Sarah in Jerusalem before giving a joint press conference. Vance acknowledged the US and its allies have a very tough task ahead as he addressed the media. Have a listen to this.
This thing takes monitoring and it's going to take a lot of work. I was in the CMCC, which we opened up yesterday. A lot of our Israeli friends working together with a lot of Americans to actually mediate this entire ceasefire process, to get some of the critical infrastructure off the ground from the international security force, so the reconstruction of Gaza. It's not easy. I never said it was easy, but what I am is optimistic that the ceasefire is going to hold and that we can actually build a better future in the entire Middle East.
And to discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by writer and broadcaster Esther Krakue, who's in Florida, and in the studio this evening, Dr. Elie Al Hindy, Chairperson of the Department of Security and Strategic Studies at the American University in the Emirates. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Let's start off with you, Dr. Elie. How significant is this meeting that we're currently seeing play out between Vance and Netanyahu, given how crucial things are at the moment?
Yeah, definitely very important. Maybe not the meeting itself, but the symbolism of it, how much the US is committed to this peace deal, not only as a guarantor, but also as someone who's putting all its weight on it, pressuring all different parties, really wanting it to succeed because, again, it's the reputation, it's the hope for a peace prize or whatever it is, but really we see the administration really committed to make this work. And we saw in the past weekend and the past few days that things are re-escalating a little bit, things are going out of control a little bit. So I think this came at a very crucial time to make sure things are not derailed in any way.
Now, you said it's obviously in their best interest, but I feel like the US is certainly showing by getting all these people on ground. I mean, we've got the trifecta. Let's go for the quad. Marco Rubio will be in town from tomorrow as well. It seems like everyone's on ground there. We're just missing one pivotal piece. Do you think you can see Trump go back again to have another shot in there and say, listen, I'm back to try and mean business here?
Maybe if need be, yes, why not? But I think this has been taken out of the hands of simply Witkoff dealing with it, and we've seen again, so many people get involved at a higher and higher level. And I don't think you need the president to be there. Having the vice president there is as much a sign of a commitment, having the secretary of state and all these people. I think also the very direct cooperation between the US and the Israeli military on all different things. So I don't necessarily see a return of Trump to the Israeli landscape altogether or to the region altogether unless there's something really significant happening. Either a big derailing or a threat of an all-out war, like, for example, a re-engagement with Iran or anything like that. But on the issue of Gaza, I think this is a big sign of how much pressure, how much we want this to happen. And I guess the Israelis understand the message very well. Still, both parties will try to maneuver a little bit right and left and try to find a better spot here or a better benefit there, as Hamas is doing and is pressured by its own guarantors and the mediators on that side. And definitely the Netanyahu government is trying to move things around. We saw a new bill in the Knesset. We were talking before the air about how to apply Israeli laws in Gaza. There's a real threat and a real scare about the security void and the legal void in Gaza if things move ahead and Hamas starts to withdraw. And we've seen some things that are happening on the streets out of control and so on. So it is really a double-edged sword. But when things are in the open like that, definitely Israel will try to move a step ahead and claim something that could be seen as a precedence in that sense.
Well, is it working though? Esther, I'll turn to you on this one. Are we seeing any changes compared to where we were, say, on Saturday, where it was teetering on the edge of this being a complete breakdown? Are we any better off now? And do you think that with Rubio heading to town tomorrow to arrive in Israel, that we could see some real change on the way?
Well, I think what Rubio heading over symbolizes is sort of a reinforcement strategy. This is his third visit since mid-September. So really, the Americans are throwing a lot of diplomatic weight behind maintaining this fragile ceasefire, and which, by the way, I have to remind everyone, that's all this is. This is just a ceasefire. I think people talking about, a peace is not going to hold, we're not going to all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. This is a conflict that's been going on for decades. I don't think it's realistic to expect the Trump administration that has been in office for just such a short amount of time to bring peace to the Middle East in some spectacular fashion. These things take time. But I think what we can all agree on is that America is the only country really with the kind of significant leverage enough to bring all the parties together, to get them to agree to something, and to make sure there are consequences if they don't. I think what is clear is that the Americans have less trust in the Israelis, especially after the Qatari attacks, which was, a complete national embarrassment for America. The fact that an ally can with such impunity, strike another American ally in this way in the middle of negotiations in what looked like an attempt to derail negotiations. And I don't think the Trump administration has any tolerance for that at all at this moment. So we're seeing them throw a lot of weight behind this. And look, this is not a lasting peace, of course. We're seeing Hamas slowly release the hostages. I think they have about 13 hostages bodies left. They've given up all the living hostages. And we know that by the end of that exchange, Hamas will have literally no leverage. Now, could this be the reason behind their drip feeding of the hostage bodies? Who knows? I wouldn't put it past them. But one thing is very clear is that the Americans are not going to allow anything to derail this up until something more tangible comes of it. And they've also made it clear that, whatever kind of peace plan moves forward and in terms of governing Gaza, they are not going to be directly involved in it because, like Trump said, no more forever wars. He's going to get local leaders in the region to handle it, of course, with financial support from the Americans and to a lesser extent Europeans. But they're going to try and patch this together with chewing gum and duct tape and then set everyone on their merry way.
Well, just to take on what you said, Esther, Dr. Elie, the US have said no boots on ground, no US boots and troops will be on ground there. But they've definitely said that we do need someone to be there. And the question is who? Because aside from Indonesia, I don't know who's put their hand up and said, listen, we will send people in, we'll help you out here.
Definitely there was this signal from Indonesia that they're willing to do it. But again, so many things are so unclear. And when there's so much uncertainty, you wouldn't put your soldiers in, you wouldn't put your assets in, you wouldn't put your credibility in. Definitely no other government has shown interest in sending troops. The Europeans have said we might send technical assistance to whoever is going to be controlling. But I truly believe if it is not Saudi Arabia or Egypt, like the big players in the region, really weighing in that and sending soldiers, troops, boots on the ground, then things are going to be much more difficult to control in Gaza in the coming period. And both countries have clearly shown no interest so far. Maybe with Egypt, if a broader agreement is done, could be more interested. Saudi Arabia so far has not shown any willingness.
But that's maybe a phase 2 or even a phase 3 step, right? So we don't get ahead of ourselves.
Again, all what we're talking, as Esther saying, is just a ceasefire, but even it's the first phase of a ceasefire. And we've just declared with President Trump the general framework. There are so many things that are still to be discussed. Even when we say disarmament, to who, when, how, and this is what Hamas is playing in. The humanitarian situation, the legal and security void, as we spoke about, the reconstruction, the new government that's going to be formed, or the new authority. Is Hamas going to be able to participate in naming these people? Mm-hmm. Will these be considered as Hamas or not? There are
surely
so
if they're
many
going
things.
To be intrinsical in actually naming the governing body behind it, that's the chickens running KFC. That's surely not possible, right?
Well, again, where are you going to get these people from? They're going to be either Hamas or Fatah, or people who are purely technical and who has been living outside Palestine. And we know that this is not going to work if it is completely who are not in touch with the ground, who don't know how to do things, who don't know how to practically control the ground in that sense. So we do need some real people holding on to the real power that is on the ground. Can this happen without Hamas's approval, or at least positive reinforcement in that sense? This is where the trick is. And then again, the Palestinian Authority, who has been completely left out, while it is the legitimate, and where the government is recognizing Palestine, they are actually recognizing the Palestinian Authority. But then there's that phrase in the agreement that says after its reform. What does that mean? How long is that going to take? What's going to happen in the meantime? All these are questions that have no answers.
Esther, looking at what happens, as we said, after that, and there is this tug of war, I guess, over Gaza's future that we're seeing, which is continuing. Israeli Parliament and in the Knesset today, and narrowly might I add, there was a vote in favour of passing this bill, which sees a preparation for a West Bank annexation. Now, that's loosely what's been termed. Obviously, that's not the correct, but it will see Israeli law be enforceable in Gaza. At this stage, would you view that as effectively what people are saying it is, views to make it an annexation of the West Bank?
Well, I think we have to be careful about how we see this, because of course there are many ways you can view this depending on where you lie ideologically. The point is that this is, practically speaking, this is the first of many stages that the bill has to go through to actually be approved by the Knesset. Of course, this is a provocation, because in the middle of these kind of fragile peace negotiations with Hamas, the last thing you want is to aggravate the Arab leaders in the region, like the UAE, for example, which has said, that is a red line for us, annexing any part of the West Bank. So clearly, I think this is a concession to the more fervent right wing of the Israeli parliament. But whether I actually think this is going to become law, I highly doubt it. Again, this first stage of many stages only passed by one vote. It was an extremely narrow vote. I think it's an extremely poor taste that this is happening now. But you're basically walking a tightrope. We're waiting to get Hamas to release all the dead bodies of the hostages, which is a condition that Israel has insisted upon, and that America's been very vocal that they're going to make sure that happens regardless. I mean, if Hamas need to dig it up with their fingernails, so be it. They're not letting them have excavation equipment, but they are saying you need to release all these dead bodies. What happens after that? I mean, I think it's important to not look too far into the future, because again, this situation that we're in right now is already so incredible that we don't want to count our chickens before they hatch. But another thing to bear in mind is, actually getting Hamas out of the region is much more complicated than that. It's like really uprooting a cancer. Hamas is as much an ideology as it is an organization, and you cannot unthink an idea. I believe there was an IDF official who said that at the height of this Gaza offensive, that Hamas was recruiting new militants at a ratio of 5 to 1. And you have to ask, why is that possible? How is that possible? Hamas, using its people as human shields, as the IDF will say, but basically treating them with such impunity and not having any regard for their lives. They're still managing to recruit so many young men. And regardless of what you think, the incentives they use, whether it was food or money or whatever, there is clearly still a pull of the extremist ideology that is fueling Hamas, that is quite deeply embedded into Gazan society. I don't even know where you would begin to de-radicalize this population, let alone, actually getting rid of Hamas. What's the point of cutting the head of the snake if 3 more pop up? You can get rid of Hamas on a technicality, but if you're dealing with a deeply radicalized population that is looking at their home that has been reduced to rubble, that certainly don't see Israel as any friend at the moment, how are you going to get over that? And so, I think that the conversation about having local leaders that the Gazan population can trust, getting a de-radicalization campaign, offering the people a better deal, because if they're looking at, dirt and rubble and still pulling many of their dead from underneath this rubble, those are other conditions for peace, regardless of what Israel says about it.
Well, with Rubio on ground tomorrow, I'm sure that story will continue. Thank you both, Dr. Elie and Esther. Thank you. We'll move on to our next story, to Ukraine now. Ukraine says it has used British-made Storm Shadow missiles in a massive strike on Russian chemical plant that is in Bryansk in the region of Russia. The attack penetrated Russian air defences and could draw new threats from Moscow. It came as Russian strikes killed 7 people in Ukraine. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has shelved talks with Vladimir Putin, calling them a wasted meeting. Esther, let's turn to you first on this. Ukraine using British-made Storm Shadow missiles inside Russia. This is somewhat of an escalation, but what, as a message, does it send to Putin?
I think as a symbolic message is clearly that, we still have the support of our international allies, of Britain and Europe more broadly. It's interesting to note that actually the Ukrainians have had permission to use these missiles since last year. So clearly they're using it sparingly. From a military perspective, it's clearly not a resource that they can just call upon at any time. They cannot use these kinds of missiles at whim. They have to be quite strategic and sparse with how they use it. But in the recent months, especially after the Russian cyber attacks and the fact that Russian Air Force planes have entered European airspace with such impunity, to the extent that they've got the Polish and Estonian ministers saying, we will shoot down your planes, which is probably the first time that there's been such an explicit threat to Russia. You're seeing the Europeans rally around the Ukrainians a lot more, which is in sharp contrast to what's happening with America. A couple of weeks ago, we heard Trump flirting with the idea of providing Ukraine with Tomahawk long-range missiles so that they can, penetrate Russia proper and really take the fight back to Putin. And then a couple of days ago, he was basically telling Zelenskyy that actually you must make concessions to Putin or face annihilation, which kind of reinforces this view that America thinks that Ukraine is just hanging on by a thread. So you're really kind of seeing two diametrically opposed views on what's happening on the ground, what should be happening. And obviously, I think America is still keen on bringing this war to an end, but what they're actually willing to do practically is unsure. I think many people are wondering if Donald Trump even knows what Putin wants. There have been discussions that they've been having conversations around land swaps. So Russia either being able to take the rest of Donetsk, the Donetsk region that is currently not occupied, or keeping the vast majority of it. It currently occupies 78% of it in exchange for other parts of Ukraine, or Ukraine keeping the other parts of Ukraine that it currently holds. Now, these are things that are completely unacceptable, it would seem, to Donald Trump, who is, from what I can see, more in favor of a no man's land territory and nothing to do with kind of galvanizing Russian speakers to one side or another. So at the moment, there's a very fractured view of what support for Ukraine looks like. I think Ukraine has been given a favor by the Russians' actions lately, in the sense that it's really made Europe wake up more than ever, because really their security and their future is in their own hands. Donald Trump has not thought on his view that NATO is no longer going to be financed by America and allow the Europeans to be lax with their own security. And I think we're starting to see that more seriously now.
Dr. Elie, this is, at the end of the day, a UK missile that has now been sent into Russian area and Russian space, and they've gone past the Ukraine border, which is a first as well. Could there be some sort of a retaliation? Do you think could there be a trigger? Putin does not like to be upstaged.
That's true. First, on a technicality, if I may, we've seen the same scenarios in Syria and other places around the world where Western countries would provide a certain limited amounts of weapons, but really be very careful on how it is used and when it is used and what is targeted with it, in order practically not to pass the political message that we are part of this war. Here we're seeing the opposite, and for the first time in 2-3 years, the UK is sending a clear message: we are part of this war, we are allowing our weapons to be used. On the other hand, we've seen Putin say, if such weapons are used, it would be considered as if it is an attack by that country, the home country of these weapons, against Russia, and we will retaliate. Eventually, in the political process, I think it's a continuous escalation by both parties. It's calling the bluff of each other. It's testing the grounds. It's really pushing the limits as much as possible without neither party is really willing to engage directly. And I don't see that happening, really. On one hand, NATO altogether, the European countries really feel the threat. They really want to push Putin back, as long as this push is happening in Ukraine and not on their lands. And of course, they are hesitant to go into any direct engagement without the US fully on board with that engagement. On the other hand, Putin definitely is pushing the limits, definitely is triggering all kind of European red lines, if I may say. But still, I don't think he is willing to directly engage, neither in Poland nor anywhere else that would eventually trigger a NATO response against him.
And I guess that's why we've seen that meeting postponed, because he's really not, Trump is of the opinion that diplomacy is not really Putin's aim.
Definitely. First, we definitely know, or we can safely say that Trump has underestimated how complex is the issue, how complex is Putin's situation in that conflict, and how much he can bring him to where he wants him to be. This has proven to be a big failure in that sense. Definitely nobody other than Trump can bring Putin to the table, because Putin wants to negotiate with Trump, not with Zelenskyy, not with the Europeans. But on the other hand, neither the carrot nor the stick have really worked with Putin so far. And somewhere the American diplomacy is stuck in that sense. They don't want to encourage the Europeans for more escalation, but also Putin is not giving in any easy way, or is not willing to come to where the US wants him to be in that sense.
And the question was, where does NATO stand in all of this? Now, Mark Rutte has made his way to Washington, and just to give you a direct piece of an update from that as well, he has spoken and said he's got total confidence in President Trump and that he's the only one who can get this done. That was after he met with top US lawmakers in Capitol Hill. He is the leader of the most powerful nation on earth. You're all citizens of the most powerful nation on earth, the most powerful economy, the most powerful military. Wow. And if you have a president like this with lots of experience because of his first term in office, he's got a clear vision on bringing this war to a durable and lasting end. That's the words of Mark Rutte, who is the Secretary General for NATO, who has made his way to Washington. They are very much, even though they're now no longer being financially backed by President Trump, they're very much placating the president's ego.
We cannot say they are not being backed by Trump, but definitely he has pushed the Europeans to increase their engagement and their financial commitments to the NATO. But still, the US is a huge part of NATO in terms of finances, in terms of military, but also in terms of politics. And we know it is always a very, very close connection between who is chosen as head of NATO and the US presidency. I wouldn't expect anything else. Maybe too much of a praise. Maybe they know how to engage Trump to make
It has been the administration of that, hasn't it? The more extravagant the gift or the praise, the easier that conversation is. And if you go against it, we see a Zelenskyy type situation where that happens again. Esther, before we move on, finally, I want to ask you: can the UK actually afford this? Sending weapons of this caliber to Ukraine seems like it's very expensive.
The short answer is no. Because the UK can hardly afford its own defence. I mean, defence spending has been sort of at the lowest record level since in the last 30 years. But it's not as bad as other countries. I mean, when you're talking about countries like Spain, for example, that I believe spends about 1.8% of its GDP on defence, you can see how nervous a country like Spain would be when basically since 2018, Donald Trump has said enough of the free ride. You know, we have been allowing the Europeans to underinvest in their own security for too long, and so this is now the onus is now on you to pay for your own defense. It's not Trump's fault that the Germans, for example, didn't listen and based an entire sort of industry on cheap Russian gas when they really should have been investing in their own defense. And I think there's a degree of embarrassment, not necessarily at sort of the high EU levels or some national political levels, but of the average European that's thinking, whether or not I like Trump, I think there is something quite patently ludicrous that I'm depending on another country for my defense, when a country like Russia can, depose cyber warfare to the extent that, they can shut down power plant, manufacturing plants in Britain, or they can basically shut down airports in Denmark and the Netherlands. I mean, it's quite ridiculous.
That's why the question, I think, Esther, should be: can the UK not afford not to send these weapons?
It can't afford it, but it can't not afford to do anything. What you're just going to see is if you can't afford something, you have to reallocate resources. So something has to give. A lot of European countries are looking quite critically at their welfare spending, which often makes up the significant amount of their national budget alongside debt. So reallocating and trimming budgets as much as possible, looking at pensions and seeing ways that they can put emergency resources towards shoring up their defence, because at the moment they really can't afford not to.
Thank you both for your thoughts on that, Dr. Elie, and also Esther. Let's move on. Eurostar has announced plans to introduce a double-decker train for the first time in the Channel Tunnel. The rail operator, which links London to Paris and also to Brussels, will order up to 50 trains. That's increasing its fleet by nearly a third. The deal is said to be worth around €2 billion. A lot of cash, a lot of money on the line here. Esther, what do you make of this move? Why, by the way, is it happening now? Why all of a sudden is there this big focus on Euro railing once again?
I think it's at the point where they have a choice. They have no choice but to invest. One of the things to remember is that they're decommissioning 34 of their trains, so 8 of the oldest trains, and the other couple of the other few dozen trains are going to come from a company that they inherited those trains from. So they actually have to upgrade their fleet, and the double-decker train is common across Europe. It's only the UK that doesn't have that because of our ludicrous environmental consultation policies and the fact that our bridges are not high enough, so we can never get away with it. Interestingly enough, having a double-decker train doesn't actually mean that they're going to double their capacity. It's only going to increase the train's capacity by about 20%. So people that think, more space means they're going to get better train fares that's unfortunately not going to happen. And if anyone has been paying attention to how expensive Eurostar has been, especially over the last 10 years, that's not great news. What could be great news is the fact that Virgin Trains are getting in on the action, and they're also going to start running trains from Britain to the European continent. Now, of course, that more competition hopefully will create a better price advantage from the consumer's perspective. But this is kind of basically a combination of the fact that they really had to upgrade their trains and the fact that, post the pandemic, post-Brexit, it seems like there is demand has either remained consistent or is likely to increase. We know that Eurostar has ordered 30 trains confirmed with an option of another 21 trains by 2030. So we're going to see if demand increases, that we might actually see more significant investment. They're also paying 80 million pounds to upgrade the only train depot facility in London that can actually maintain these double-decker trains. So either way you slice it, greater investment for the UK and greater interconnected travel between Britain and Europe, which seem to need each other more than ever at the moment.
Look, it's a lot of money to spend on something, but to be fair, a lot of these train carriages, some of the older ones, have been there since the very, very start, since 1992 to 1996 was the initial one. And the newer trains, I think, have been developed, the latest one coming into service in 2018, so they're heading on for 8 years. They're probably due an upgrade anyway. But now what we're seeing is the bigger picture, Dr. Elie, is that this is somewhat of a significant improvement for post-Brexit. And anything that seems to link Europe to the UK is being welcomed very favourably by the public, at least.
Definitely. I think first on the technical side, I think Europe has shifted its spending in the past decade or so into more, green energy production, social policies, all of that, at the detriment of actual essential infrastructure.
Yeah.
And now, as you said, it's time where they cannot afford it anymore. More importantly, on the political sense of things, we've seen the UK in these couple of years, the closest to Europe since Brexit and even maybe before that, where we're seeing interconnection and interdependency on the politics, on the military, and now, of course, on the economic aspect. Mm-hmm. This is a connection that is needed by both economies, the EU and the UK, and this is something that will boost both economies positively. The problem is, as you said, this requires huge amounts of investments. Who is willing to do that investment? What are the restrictions on that? And what is the return on investment for private companies if they are to do that? If not private companies, can the governments do that? The answer so far is still very weak in that sense. It is definitely a needed connection. It is definitely a beneficial connections on all levels, connecting the UK to the EU.
Esther, what's the deal with these trains? What do we know about them? I know that they're bigger for sure, but not by a lot, right? And is it going to be a different passenger experience when on board? Are we likely to see maybe a business class, almost a first class level on Eurostar, or am I dreaming here?
So Eurostar have confirmed that passengers can choose seats on any deck, and the layout is going to be exactly the same. There's not going to be a price differential. So if you choose the upper deck or the lower deck, we saw trains like this introduced in the 50s and 60s in the UK, and they were discontinued in the late 70s because the maintenance was too expensive, and there was this idea that it just made kind of servicing in trains, so serving people food, a bit of a nightmare because they had to keep going up and down the stairs. We know that in British trains, they just, wheel their cart down because there are no levels. But obviously, it's a bit more complicated when you have a double-decker train. I think the small detail that kind of sticks in the craw is the fact that, Britain was a leading pioneer in train infrastructure and train design and just creating trains around the world. Now they've just signed a massive deal for French trains. So that's... we never thought we'd be here, but hey ho, Brexit.
Got a sting. But let's move on to our next story. Thank you both so much. The makers of ChatGPT are hoping that the rival to Google has just been launched. It's a new AI-powered web browser called Atlas. Now, unlike Chrome, Atlas is not going to require an address search bar. And Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, says Atlas has been built pretty much around ChatGPT, as the new browser has now become available on Apple devices. Dr. Elie, first of all, what's different? What is Atlas about? What is going to make this different to any other search engine? What's the difference between that and Google?
I think it's responding to the people's needs and to the people usage of how they have been using ChatGPT in general. And we've seen more and more people go towards AI networks like ChatGPT and others just to get a simple answer, a clear answer that combines different sources into one simple, clear answer or a sentence as simple as that. Whereas Google is usually where you go find links to other pages, where you go do a search or something like that. Definitely Google has introduced their AI answer before you get to the actual links. But still, I think the big difference is going to be that with Atlas, you're going to be able to get the straight to the point, the short answer that you're looking for without going into different links and different versions. You will simply have it there synthesized from all different sources. Now, also on the other hand, it's definitely Google has been criticized for actually, serving first which answers and which is paid by advertising, how to get your company to show up first and so on. So far, AI has been maybe free from that, and this is also appealing to the people in that sense.
So in terms of when you Google something, you're getting a stack of SEOs. With Atlas, that's not something that you're going to encounter, at least not at this phase.
Not currently, exactly.
Okay. Esther, privacy concerns. We're hearing a lot about somewhat of an autopilot or even an agent mode that is going to be put into place here as well, which is causing some privacy concerns for people simply because of the sheer scale of what AI and what ChatGPT currently stores upon all of its users.
Yeah, I mean, that was always going to be the concerns about AI-powered search engines, which is the kind of the ethics around it. Which is why you've heard kind of, the jobs of the future being touted about is AI ethicists and people that create the moral boundaries and frameworks for within which AI, not just search engines, but any kind of AI-powered technology has to operate within. Now, I don't know if I'm being a bit biased here, but I think the potential breakup of big tech fills me with much glee. A court recently ruled that Google has an effective monopoly on web search. And I think, whenever you hear people leveling criticisms at the way we're seeking to regulate big tech and comparing it to the aviation industry, which basically has three major companies, Airbus, Boeing, and to a lesser extent, Embraer, when you see them drawing parallels to that, I think they don't really understand it. Because if you want to draw parallels with aviation, you also have to admit that big tech hasn't been regulated anywhere near the way that aviation has been regulated. So much so that whenever there's a plane crash, it's all over the news. For example, if a plane calls a mayday, for example, you have news crews on standby waiting to see the plane land. The rules in aviation are written in blood because it's taken so seriously. And I think while we come more or less to grips with how impactful big tech is in our lives with social media and Google and search and all of that, we haven't necessarily got to grips with how to regulate it. A big part of that is the fact that many governments are just behind on it. Whenever they legislate on something, technology has advanced and they don't really have the kind of flexible infrastructure to adequately regulate on this and to still create a space where AI can still develop and flourish and make humans' lives better while still maintaining those sorts of guardrails. So, safety concerns will always going to be there. And I think this is where you're going to see many jobs that focus solely on human judgment open up in the future. I'm not really a pessimist and believe that AI is going to destroy everyone's jobs. I think it's going to open other opportunities like all technological advancements do. But I do think the onus is on governments to create a more flexible and adaptable and proactive framework to make sure that people's concerns about privacy and safety are adequately addressed without sort of being behind on this. And this might mean having separate departments that are uniquely focused on this. I mean, if you look at the UK, for example, you have many civil service branches, but they vastly differ in quality. You have the Ministry of Education, for example, which is and having known people that work in it, disappointing. But the Ministry of Defense is fantastic, and it's run like a well-oiled machine. So I think that's where really the onus should be on governance, good, proper governance, and proactivity.
So Sam Altman, obviously a smart businessman, he kind of has the jump on this, Dr. Elie, for the fact that he's the first of. He's much like Mark Zuckerberg with social media. May not have been the first, but it's the biggest one that we know of. He's kind of got the advantage here, and he's going into this market with something called Atlas. Is there a missed opportunity here? Because generalization speaking, when you look at things like Let Me Google It, Hoover being the biggest known name in vacuum cleaners, Velcro being what you stick onto, everything that sticks to something else is termed as Velcroed. ChatGPT, it's kind of becoming something, let me ChatGPT it. But now he's coming with this new brand called Atlas. Nobody's going to say, let me Atlas that for you. So has he missed out something there?
But I think even ChatGPT, it truly has been the first, and he truly has been the pioneer. But then so many other companies have quickly catched up. And this goes back to what Esther was saying in terms of regulation, in terms of catching up, in terms to seeing what is coming up every day, a new platform that does a different thing, a different category of people are using this rather than that, and so on. I think it is way too complex to regulate. And I think it is way too complex for anybody to claim the pioneering role or the fatherhood of that thing. And I think people have already moved beyond ChatGPT, and it's not going to become that Google effect of having everything linked to Google and becoming a verb itself, as you mentioned. Will Atlas become so? Maybe. That's a different category of a search engine per se. But again, I think too many things are happening in too many places and too many different aspects of AI, as it has involved every aspect of our life, every field, every sector. So it's really difficult to say that one is going to catch the biggest size of the market.
Still have to download it immediately after the show to see exactly what all the hype is about, though. Well, it's that time of the show where both Elie and Esther have chosen two of the quirkier stories from the news for today. Esther, let's turn to you first. Yours is about a woman who's after getting fined a whopping £150 in the UK simply for doing something that, to me, seems like something I do 3 or 4 times a day.
Yeah, I think the Q is where she got fined, which was in Kew, a town in Richmond. She basically got fined for apparently breaking an obscure environmentalist law, which said you cannot pour things down the drain that could potentially contaminate water supply. She didn't know this. She was using a reusable cup, and she was about to hop onto a bus, and she got slapped with a £150 fine. Now, I can assure you, if this one was in other parts of London, less leafy, less posh, less developed, less rich parts of London, she would not have been fined. I'm pretty sure her local police officer wouldn't have even known of this legislation. But unfortunately, she was in an area where the busybody police, who I must say was told, we have been told, handled this professionally, they apparently knew of it, and so she got slapped with a fine. Unfortunately, in London, in other parts of London, you have to commit more grave crimes to ever see the police, some of which might include murder. Is
the area queue quite upmarket then in that case? Would environmental police be something that's normally on patrol out there, keeping an eye for litter bugs?
Let's just say there's no environmental police in Tottenham or Croydon. I'll just put it that way. They don't exist.
Worse things have been thrown down drains, I'm sure, in the past. Dr. Elie, yours is about pen pals. Never had one personally. Never going to know the excitement about it.
No, me neither, but I definitely know, and I've seen people around me during the civil war in Lebanon enjoying the beauty of pen pals and sharing these feelings and sharing their stories with somebody who's, miles and miles away, but still can connect with you and can give you this kind of sympathy and well-being. So the story is a beautiful story about pen pal friendship that started 43 years ago, 1983, when both ladies were in grade 5. We're talking about Clark Casey and Michelle Ann Ning, one from Singapore, one from Canada. And they actually kept going since grade 5 up till today. After 43 years, they never stopped communicating by letters, which none of us actually still does. And the beauty of the story is that they were actually able to meet in Newfoundland in Canada, where the two actually met for the first time, and again went back throughout all these years and years of sharing memories and sharing stories, and they were able to do it in person this time. Oh,
it's a nice story. Esther, did you have a pen pal? Ever have somebody you were communicating with on the regular on letters?
No, I don't. But unfortunately, I have the handwriting of a doctor. So make of that what you will. I don't think if I had a pen pal, it would have lasted very long.
Now instead you can just go and research them all. And I guess, as Dr. Elie pointed out earlier on, who needs pen pals when we can use ChatGPT?
Well, it's answering our emails now. It's writing our letters. That's
giving
a
us
big
helpful
disadvantage.
advice. It's a friend that we didn't know that we needed. Well, I want to say thank you to both of our guests this evening, writer and broadcaster Esther Krakue, joining us from Florida. Thank you very much for taking time out. And Dr. Elie Al Hindy, Chairperson of the Department of Security and Strategic Studies at the American University in the Emirates. And that is all that we've got time for on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. As always, you can follow us on X, and GNT is on the way next. But for now, goodbye.